Hello and welcome to another episode of Ewell Acres. Today we're going to be continuing our discussion about gardening plants by talking about perennials, the advantages and disadvantages, and what you might decide to use them for if you decide to grow them. Let's get started. If you like what we're doing, if you're gaining value out of these videos, please don't forget to subscribe, click on that bell for notifications. Not only does it help us out with the YouTube algorithm, but it also helps to spread these videos around so that way we can learn from each other with each other. Now, when you're dealing with when you're dealing with perennials, what is a perennial? A perennial is going to be a plant that lives for multiple season cycles over its entire life cycle. Meaning it's going to germinate from seed, it's going to grow, form a small plant. The second, third year it's going to form stems, it's going to form flowers, and it's going to produce seed year after year after year. Until eventually it's going to grow old and die, meaning the root, the stem, and the foliage, everything dies. Now, there are some perennials, like strawberries, that are only going to grow for a productive 3 to 5 years. And then there are other plants, like your apples, your nut trees, that can live for decades and decades. So the range of what it means to be a perennial can vary drastically. So that's why they have the terms of any plant that lives longer than 3 seasons or more. Now, one of the great things about perennials is they have a lot of tremendous benefits. Typically speaking, perennials are going to be much larger than your annuals or biennials, meaning the root system is going to grow much bigger, their overall canopy is going to grow much bigger. Why this is a major advantage is because their root system is going to grow much deeper into the soil. It's going to help build up your overall soil profile much stronger. They're typically going to be a lot more drought tolerant. They're going to be much easier to take care of themselves requirement-wise. Because their root system is going to be much larger, they're going to be able to search for nutrients much easier. They're going to be able to search for water much easier and bring that closer to the surface to help other plants. They are called anchor plants. Just like you have your anchor stores when you're looking at a business area, you have your big box store that will encourage the smaller little stores to grow up around it until you have an entire shopping complex. Well, the perennial plants do that exact same thing. You have your apple trees, your orchards. Those are going to be long-term great benefits that are going to keep giving season after season after season. One other great thing about perennials is oftentimes it's going to take a little bit longer for them to produce seed. But typically speaking, perennials are going to be woody, they're going to be a little bit larger, which means they're going to be much more successful at taking plant cuttings, at doing propagations. You are going to be able to get larger plants out of them much quicker than you will biennials or annuals. Now, a very common thing that's similar to taking cuttings is with perennials, you are able to take advantages of 2 or 3 different plants and do a process what's called grafting. This is most commonly done in orchard fruit trees or nut trees. What you do is you take a root stock that is going to be much more disease resistant and have it grow up. Then you are going to implant either a branch, or you'll cut that entire tree off and graft another tree that's going to have superior disease resistance or fruit to that rootstock. So that way you can meld 2 highly beneficial things. And this is something that's been done in the arboreal culture industry for hundreds of years to gain that benefit. Another great major advantage to perennials is it may take a few years for them to get started, but once they do, they are going to be the giving tree that gives year after year. Once that apple tree is established, it is going to give you bushels and bushels of fruit every single year, meaning the bang for your buck that you get is going to be long term. And that's one of the great things about perennials is they're going to help to be an anchor plant to help you in planning for that long-term production of food. So in following that exact same timeline and thought process, Perennials, yes, they may be a little bit more expensive up front, but the long-term costs for perennials are going to be very, very low. You only have one price that you have to purchase for that plant, and then it is yours forever. There is no continual upkeep costs in having to produce new plants like there are in annuals or biennials. That's one of the reasons why I love spices. As you can see, I've got a bunch of rosemary behind me that I'm looking to plant, grow, so that way I can put them in the field. Yes, it's going to take a couple years before I can start getting these guys to really consistently produce. But once they get to that level where they're able to consistently produce, they will give for me year after year. Because these plants typically are going to be a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, oftentimes they're not going to be as susceptible to insects or diseases. When a large perennial plant gets attacked by aphids, it can tend to withstand it a little bit more. It's going to take a lot more to knock it down. If you were to take the aphids that were to attack an annual and the aphids to talk to a perennial, what would very easily kill the annual, that perennial can brush off like it's nothing and continue on its day. We already brushed a little bit into some of the advantages that we're dealing with, but now we're going to talk about disadvantages. First being the financial cost. Now, with annuals, they are going to be very cheap. You can get thousands of plants for just a couple dollars of lettuce or other ones by purchasing seed. The downside to that, like we talked about in another video, is there's long-term reoccurring costs. One of the disadvantages about perennials is it is a gut check to your wallet. That's first-time payment. If you want to purchase an apple tree as of spring 2021, you're looking at $50, $60 for one tree. One other major disadvantage in dealing with perennials is they are a long-term plan that you have to deal with. So they're typically going to be much larger long-term. Now that can be an advantage as we talked about it, but it can also be a disadvantage. If you happen to plant an apple tree right next to your house and it continues to grow and grow, well, if you didn't plan that properly, very quickly it can start brushing up against your house and overgrowing the area that you had planned for. One other major disadvantage of perennials is they will give you a tremendous amount of fruit in the long term, year after year. The downside to that is, though, oftentimes with perennials, it's going to be several seasons until you actually start to get a crop. And your first couple years of that crop is not going to be very large. So when you're dealing with large orchard trees, like your apples, your peaches, you're not even going to get a crop until you're looking at 4, 5, 6 seasons in. And then it's going to be a very small one. You're really not going to get significant crops out of those trees until you're looking at the 6 to 10 year range. So that is one thing to keep in mind with perennials. You are looking at the long-term game, not the short-term. As we talked about a little bit earlier, perennials are going to be a little bit more resistant to insects. They're going to be more resistant to diseases. But one of the major downsides to this is when the trees do finally start to go down, when they're getting attacked by insects, when they're getting attacked by diseases, oftentimes if it gets overwhelmed, it is going to be a death blow. When you're dealing with a death blow with annuals, yes, it's sad, but it's not a major gut check. Very easily able to replace that because you have a very small financial cost. You have a relatively small time investment. When you lose a peach tree, when you lose an apple tree after it's been diseased, after it's getting attacked by fire blight or some other type of disease, you've got 10 plus years invested into this one plant. These are just some of the things that we've looked at, some of the advantages and disadvantages when you're dealing with perennials. Let us know in the comments below. Is there some things that we forgot? Is there some things that you think that should have been on this list that wasn't? Let us know in the comments below. One other major thing to take a look at when you're dealing with perennials, we've been primarily focusing on the big boys of perennials, the guys long term. But depending on your climatic situation, even though technically speaking a plant is considered a perennial, depending on your climatic conditions, they will be grown as annuals. Technically speaking, when you look at the scientific definitions of a perennial, your peppers, your tomatoes, some of those plants are going to be perennials in their native environment, which are going to be warmer tropical climates. Oftentimes, though, due to it being a very cold climatic condition where you grow them, tomatoes, peppers are actually grown and seen as more often as annuals. So that is one thing to keep in mind, is what are the climatic conditions that this plant is from. By learning the history, the climatic conditions of where a plant is from, you can understand, are they a perennial, are they an annual, and what are the growing conditions to help best make them survive. By understanding that, that will allow you in growing those perennials that you decide that you do want to grow to be much successful by understanding the care and needs that that plant takes. Thank you so much for joining us today as we take a look at perennials. If you like what we're doing, if you're gaining value out of these videos, don't forget to subscribe, click on that bell for notifications. We are so glad that you were able to join us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.